In a lot of teachings and practices, they talked about people who were awake, right? Who were being the reality of what they are as awareness. They would say this person is a seer, right? He's a seer, right? What that means is that the person knows the difference between a perception and seeing. A perception is an interpretation of what it's seeing, right? Perception is an interpretation of what's being seen. That's the default state for most people, right? Most people don't know that the voice in your head is the narrator of what's going on, and it's telling you what you're seeing. That is an interpretation, right? It's only after you have experienced being awake that you can start to see what's actually there. So in terms of when we were just practicing meditation, when the spinning class started upstairs, a listening, because that's the same thing with listening, right? Are you hearing what's there, or are you hearing an interpretation of what's there? If you have a listening for what's actually there, that occurs as a sound. If you have a listening for the interpretation, that occurs as a distraction. And the reality of it is that it's a sound, right? You could take it further than that and say that it's not even a sound, but a sound is a clearer perception or a clear seeing of it than the idea that it's a distraction. A distraction would be a perception of it. This is very important because as you move around in your life and you deal with other people, right? When you're having an upset in relationship to other people, right? It's because of the perception you're having. You're not seeing, if you're seeing what's actually happening, you're actually seeing the person is doing what they're doing, they're saying what they're saying. That's all that's happening. But the perception of it, that most people are seeing as the reality of it, most people are seeing, no, they're not just doing what they're doing, right? They're being an asshole, or like somebody that's driving in front of you too slow, right? You don't see a person driving a car, you see an asshole, in your way, right? And you think that's what you're seeing. That's why you react to that person as an asshole, right? So this is the distinction between perception and seeing. It's a very important distinction. In that video that you mentioned, he mentions Douglas Harding's work, right? And I've mentioned that here. I haven't spoken about it a lot, but Richard Lang wrote the foreword for my first book, and Richard Lang was the primary student of Douglas Harding, and my first book was really about Douglas Harding's work. And Douglas Harding's work was about seeing. And one of the things, for example, that he talked about in terms of seeing is that if you're seeing what's actually going on, everything reverses. If you're driving your car, we learn that the car's moving and the environment is staying still, right? But if that's a perception, right? That's an interpretation of what's happening. You learn that, right? If you see what's happening, you actually see that the car's not moving and the world is. And you can actually see that if you learn how to see. Douglas Harding did a lot of experiments, and if you're interested, you could go to the headless.org website. There's a lot of experiments, and they're very interesting and fun to do, where they create situations where you could see instead of interpret what's going on. So, something that I saw this morning that I wanted to share. This was something from J. Krishnamurti. And J. Krishnamurti was an interesting teacher. And one of the things that distinguished him from other teachers was that he was anti-belief, anti-hierarchy, that there is a pat answer to anything. One of the things that I think is important in this process of what you're learning and practicing is to understand that meditation is not is not a Japanese, Chinese, or Indian thing. These teachings are not Japanese, Chinese, or Indian teachings. Unfortunately, they come in that package because that's the cultures that they came from. But it's very important to understand that the truth does not have a culture. The truth does not have, what Krishnamurti said is the truth is a pathless land, right? So it's important in your studies to make that distinction so you don't think that the truth is Chinese or it's Zen. A lot of people actually get lost in that stuff, and they're using interpretations of the truth that are culturally shaped by those countries and from different times, and that just confuses the whole situation. It's better that you understand the truth is you where you are now is the truth. That's the truth that you want to inquire into. You may learn from those other things, but in the end, you've got to be the teacher. You've got to see in your own experience what's so. And by the authority of seeing it for yourself, you're convinced of its truth. Do you see what I'm saying? Not because some teacher somewhere said that. So this is something that Krishnamurti said that's consistent with one of the things I try and bring out here. He said, the rich want to forget themselves in nightclubs, in amusements, in cars, in traveling. The clever ones want to forget themselves, so they begin to invent, to have extraordinary beliefs. The stupid ones want to forget themselves, and so they follow people. They have gurus who tell them what to do. The ambitious ones also want to forget themselves in doing something. So all of us, as we mature, as we grow older, want to forget ourselves. And so we try to find something greater with which to be identified. So that was something that Krishnamurti said. And one of the things about that he's talking about is that you have to become disillusioned with trying to get satisfied and be happy with objects, substances, relationships, meditation, books, learning. You have to exhaust that and realize it's never going to come from any of those places. Those places may provide things for you to consider, but in the end, the consideration that makes the most that is the most important is that those things will fail to produce the experience of satisfaction and happiness. And when they do, that's when there is this natural turning back to where you're looking from instead of where you're trying to go, right? That's self-inquiry, right? And that's what we're talking about here, is self-inquiry. It is the most important aspect of the human experience, is self-inquiry, right? Because if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what you are, and you have no sense of what reality is, where are you? What chance do you have of experiencing what's possible if you're living in a very limited state of awareness and you have accepted what has been, what you've been conditioned to consider to be reality, and you've accepted what you've been conditioned to consider who you are. And so within that reality, within that world, you can spend a lifetime attempting to find happiness, right? Attempting to find peace, attempting to find satisfaction. And it's very important to recognize at some point that it's not going to happen that way. Many times people say that as they got older, they saw it because you've been around trying so many different things and none of it's worked, right? But it doesn't have to come just from failing and trying to get it from there. It can also come from a recognition of the reality of who you are. It's not it doesn't have to go that way. It doesn't have to come from being totally disillusioned out of everything that you've tried. It often happens that way. But the thing about this process of self-realization and awakening to the truth is that there is no particular formula about it. It happens in many different ways. It happened for Eckhart Tolle just like the lights went on. When some people have that spontaneous awakening experience, it's very unsettling. It's very unsettling. It's pulling the rug out from under your reality, right? So for most people, it's a slower process. Where you first learn conceptually about the truth and learn conceptually about who you are, right? And then if you continue to understand that the only way you're going to actually know it in a way where you're absolutely convinced about it is to be it. You can never see it, you can never know it outside of being it, right? And so if you get to a place where you recognize that that's true, something clicks, because when you let go and stop trying to be it and realize you are it, right, then you know it. You know it. Not that you see it, but you know it because you are it, and you know when you are it that you've always been it, that you've never been anything but that. Once that occurs, now you're in a new world. Do you understand? Once that occurs, you're in a new realm of possibility. And once that occurs, because you're in a new realm of possibility, there is a purification process that has to happen, right? The programming that is in your mind and brain will continue to run, even though you have now experienced the truth, right? And so it'll continue to run, and as it continues to run, because you're no longer contracted, because you're no longer trying to hold on, you're no longer identified with the body and the personality, that there's a clearing process that takes place, right? There is a reconditioning process that takes place. And that reconditioning process and that clearing process can at times be very uncomfortable, right? Because now that you know that you're not a personality, all of the ways the personality has tried to be in control by stuffing emotions, by trying to hold on, by being contracted physically, right? Now that you know who you are, it becomes safe to let that go, right? And when you let that go, the repressed material starts to come up, right? So it may be very confusing because you may have the experience of yourself, and then these uncomfortable emotions are coming up, right? And you may feel like, well, what's going on? Why is that happening, right? Because since I know who I am, why is it that I'm not just experiencing being happy, satisfied, and peaceful, right? Because the process has to continue in which the programming of the mind, right, reconditions itself, and the way that it does that is by allowing these repressed emotions that come from your past experiences to come up and get released. The energy comes up and is released. And that can be very uncomfortable, right? But if you understand what's going on, you realize that this is a good thing. That this shows that you are transforming into the truth of yourself as this happens. And if you understand what's happening, then you are more at ease about it, even though it's uncomfortable. And you'll just let that process happen, and over time it lessens as these things clear up, right? And you gradually become, the personality gradually becomes more consistent with the reality of who you are, right? And so that takes time. And that's one of the reasons why it's good to have some guidance. It's good to have somebody to talk to about these things so that you don't stay stuck with it and think that you're lost, or get confused and think that you're missing the boat, or you went unconscious again, or whatever the case may be. Okay? So I think it's very important to understand that this process has got to be authored and pursued by you. You can't. One of the big mistakes that people make is they give away their power to a teacher or a guru. You know, and some of the systems that existed in the past, that was part of the process. You know, you can't be trusted because you're blind, so follow me until you can start to see. That was a legitimate way of doing things in the past, but that's not consistent with the way things are today. You know, you have enough information available, and you have enough of an opportunity, given the guidance that's available in so many different ways now, to run your own evolution, you know, to run your own awakening process. And that's the way it should be. You should be the originator of your own awakening, and you should be the person who authors the process for yourself. And it should be a process in which it should be a process where you realize trying does not work in this process of opening up and realizing who you are. Trying doesn't work. So you don't try harder. You don't do more of something. You don't do different things. You just keep looking and inquiring into, who am I being right now? Who am I? What's the source here? Right? And as I was saying earlier, as that becomes something that gets integrated into your process of living, things start to clear up on their own, right? Because you find yourself being yourself. You find yourself being yourself in situations in the past that you would get into trouble, or situations in the past that you would be destructive and do things you regretted doing. But as this process evolves, you find yourself seeing things as they are and not reacting in the same old way, and start to be able to be there and be responsive in a way where you have clarity, and then things start to work that weren't working before.